The dust kicked up by the old pickup truck settled slowly in the scorching Arizona heat, revealing a woman who looked like she'd been driving for days without sleep. Emma Claire stepped out of the battered Ford, her auburn hair escaping from a messy ponytail, freckles standing out against her pale, exhausted face. In her arms, she cradled a wicker basket that emitted the softest mewing sounds, while tucked under her other arm was a rolled-up piece of paper that would change everything. The Copper Creek Ranch sprawled before her like something out of a Western movie, all weathered wood and endless horizons under the relentless desert sun. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Cacti dotted the landscape, and in the distance, red rock formations jutted up toward a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. This was her last hope, the final address on a crumpled list she'd been carrying for 3 states. Emma had been driving for 17 hours straight, surviving on gas station coffee and the kind of determination that comes from having nowhere else to go. The basket in her arms held 5 tiny kittens, barely old enough to have their eyes open, orphaned when their mother had been hit by a car outside the veterinary clinic where Emma used to work. Used to work being the operative phrase, since that was before her world had collapsed in spectacular fashion. The ranch house sat like a fortress against the desert backdrop, its wraparound porch offering the only shade for miles. Wind chimes made of old horseshoes tinkled softly in the hot breeze, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the low lowing of cattle. It was the kind of place that spoke of generations, of roots that ran deep into the red earth, everything Emma had never had and desperately longed for. She shifted the basket to one arm and approached the front steps, her boots crunching on the gravel. The kittens mewed plaintively, and she made soft shushing sounds, the same way she'd been comforting them since she'd found them 3 days ago. 3 days that felt like 3 years, considering everything that had happened. The screen door creaked open before she could knock, and Emma found herself face to face with a man who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a classic Western. Tall and lean, with shoulders that spoke of hard work, he had dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was all sharp angles and stubbled jaw, and when those gray eyes fixed on her, Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. "You lost, miss?" His voice carried the slight drawl that seemed to be part of the desert landscape itself, rough around the edges but not unkind. He wore faded jeans and a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with old scars and new calluses. Emma straightened her spine, summoning the last reserves of courage that had carried her this far. "I'm looking for Jake Morrison. I was told he might have work for someone with veterinary experience." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, and she noticed the way his gaze flicked to the basket in her arms, then to her face, then to something behind her. Following his line of sight, she realized he was looking at her truck, specifically at the way the back was loaded with everything she owned in the world, hastily packed and poorly secured. "You're looking at him," he said after a long moment, "though I don't recall advertising for help." Jake Morrison. The name matched the face, she thought. Strong, uncompromising. The kind of man who'd carved a life out of unforgiving land through sheer will and determination. She'd heard about him from Dr. Peterson, an old veterinarian she'd met at a truck stop in New Mexico, who'd mentioned that Jake ran one of the largest cattle operations in southern Arizona and had been having trouble finding reliable help. "Dr. Peterson in Santa Fe mentioned you might need someone," Emma said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "He said you'd been through 3 vets in the past year." Something flickered across Jake's face at the mention of Peterson's name, and his expression softened just a fraction. "Peterson's a good man. Helped me out of a tight spot once." He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms over his chest. "What's your name, and what's in the basket?" "Emma Claire," she said, then looked down at the tiny faces peering up at her from the wicker basket. "And these are orphaned kittens. Their mother was killed, and they need feeding every 2 hours. I've been taking care of them, but I need to find them homes." Jake's expression remained carefully neutral, but she caught the way his eyes lingered on the kittens, something almost tender flickering across his features before he caught himself. "Veterinary experience, you said. Where'd you work last?" This was the moment Emma had been dreading. The question that had made her last 3 potential employers slam doors in her face. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out the folded wanted poster, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded it. "I think you should see this first," she said quietly, holding it out to him. Jake took the paper, his eyes scanning the official-looking document. Emma watched his face change as he read, saw the way his jaw tightened and his eyes hardened. The poster was from the Colorado State Veterinary Board, complete with her photo and the words, "License Suspended," in bold red letters across the top. Below that, in smaller print, were the charges: practicing without proper certification, falsifying medical records, endangering animal welfare. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft mewing of the kittens and the distant sound of cattle. Emma felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited for Jake to tell her to get in her truck and keep driving, just like everyone else had. "These charges," Jake said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "They true?" Emma met his gaze steadily, even though it felt like looking into a storm. "No. But explaining that is complicated." "I've got time," he said, surprising her. Instead of handing back the poster and walking away, he folded it carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "Why don't you come inside? Looks like those kittens could use some milk, and you look like you could use a meal." Emma blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You're not telling me to leave?" Jake's smile was small and didn't quite reach his eyes, but it was genuine. "Lady, I've been betrayed by enough people in my life to recognize when someone's telling the truth. Besides, Peterson wouldn't have sent you if he didn't trust you, and that man's judgment has never steered me wrong." The interior of the ranch house was exactly what Emma had expected, all worn leather and polished wood, with Native American rugs scattered across hardwood floors that had been walked on by generations of boots. The walls were lined with photographs, some old enough to be sepia-toned, showing the progression of the ranch through the decades. Jake led her to a large kitchen dominated by a farmhouse table that looked like it had been built to last centuries. Copper pots hung from hooks above a massive stove, and herbs grew in small pots along the windowsill. It was the kind of kitchen that spoke of family meals and holiday gatherings, though Emma noticed it was set for one. "Sit," Jake said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I'll get some milk for those babies." Emma settled the basket on the table and watched as Jake moved efficiently through the kitchen, warming milk and finding small bottles that looked like they'd been used for feeding orphaned calves. His movements were economical and practiced, and she found herself wondering about the story behind those feeding bottles. "You've done this before," she observed as he tested the temperature of the milk on his wrist, the same way she'd been doing for the past 3 days. "Ranch life," he said simply. "You learn to take care of whatever needs taking care of. Lost my share of mothers over the years, both four-legged and otherwise." There was something in his tone that suggested layers Emma didn't understand yet. Pain that went deeper than losing livestock. She accepted the bottle he handed her and lifted the smallest kitten from the basket. A tiny gray tabby that couldn't have weighed more than a few ounces. "So," Jake said as he settled across from her with his own kitten, a bold orange tom that attacked the bottle with surprising vigor. "Tell me about Colorado." Emma felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with revisiting the worst chapter of her life. "I worked for a large animal practice outside Denver. Thought I'd found my place, you know? Good job, nice colleagues. Finally felt like I belonged somewhere." "What changed?" Jake's voice was gentle, encouraging, as if he understood what it felt like to have a life fall apart. "My supervisor, Dr. Marcus Webb, was running an illegal breeding operation on the side. Puppy mill, but high-end. He was falsifying health certificates, using the clinic's equipment after hours, forging my signature on documents." Emma's voice grew harder as she spoke, anger replacing the hurt. "When I found out and confronted him, he turned everything around on me, made it look like I was the one running the operation." Jake was quiet for a moment, focusing on feeding the kitten in his hands. "How'd he manage that?" "He was smart about it. Set up accounts in my name, made sure I was the one who handled certain cases that later turned out to be connected to his operation. By the time I realized what was happening, he had enough evidence to make it look like I was the mastermind and he was just an unwitting accomplice." "What about the other vets? Didn't anyone speak up for you?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "Webb was well-connected, had been at the practice for 15 years. I'd only been there 2. When it all came out, It was easier for everyone to believe that the newcomer was the problem, not their golden boy. Jake set down his bottle and looked at her directly. "So you ran." "I tried to fight it at first, hired a lawyer, gathered evidence, spent every penny I had trying to clear my name." Emma's voice cracked slightly. "But Webb was thorough. Every piece of evidence I found, he had an explanation for. Every witness I thought would support me mysteriously developed memory problems when it came time to testify. And the veterinary board? Suspended my license pending investigation. That was 18 months ago. The investigation is still ongoing, but they've made it clear that without new evidence, they're not likely to reverse their decision." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that made Emma squirm. She'd learned to recognize the look people got when they decided she was more trouble than she was worth, and she braced herself for the polite dismissal. Instead, Jake surprised her again. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think Marcus Webb made one crucial mistake." Emma looked up, hope flickering in her chest despite her best efforts to keep it buried. "What's that?" "He underestimated you." Jake's smile was warmer this time, reaching his eyes. "Takes a special kind of person to load up everything they own and drive across 3 states with a basket of orphaned kittens, just on the off chance they might find work with a stranger." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Or a desperate kind of person," Emma said quietly. "Maybe, but I've found that desperation and courage often look the same from the outside." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes, the first genuine kindness she'd encountered in months, hitting her harder than she'd expected. "Why are you being so nice to me? For all you know, those charges could be true." Jake set down the kitten he'd been feeding and leaned back in his chair. "You want the honest truth?" Emma nodded. "Because 3 years ago, I was in a similar position. Not the same circumstances, but the same feeling of having everything you worked for stripped away by someone you trusted." His voice grew rougher. "And because when I was at my lowest point, Peterson was the one who gave me a chance when nobody else would." "What happened 3 years ago?" Jake's expression closed off slightly, and Emma could see him weighing how much to share. "Let's just say I learned the hard way that family doesn't always mean loyalty, and that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most willing to stab you in the back." Before Emma could ask more questions, the sound of boots on the front porch interrupted them. Jake's entire demeanor changed, his shoulders tensing as he stood up. "Expecting someone?" Emma asked. "No," Jake said grimly. "And unexpected visitors are rarely good news out here." The front door opened without a knock, and Emma heard a woman's voice call out, "Jake, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Jake muttered something under his breath that Emma couldn't catch, but his expression suggested it wasn't complimentary. "Stay here," he told Emma. "Keep feeding the kittens." Emma watched through the kitchen doorway as Jake walked to the front of the house. She could hear voices, Jake's low and controlled, the woman's higher and increasingly agitated, but she couldn't make out the words. The conversation grew more heated, and Emma found herself straining to listen while trying to focus on the hungry kitten in her hands. After about 10 minutes, she heard the front door slam, followed by the sound of a car engine starting up and driving away. Jake returned to the kitchen, his face thunderous. "Everything okay?" Emma asked carefully. Jake poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the counter, his movements sharp and angry. "Just a reminder that some ghosts never stay buried, no matter how far you run." Emma set down her kitten and looked at him. "The person you trusted who betrayed you?" "Among others." Jake took a long sip of his coffee, then seemed to make an effort to relax his shoulders. "Sorry, family drama, not your problem. Sometimes it helps to talk about it," Emma offered quietly. Jake's laugh was humorless. "You first showed me yours, as they say. Fair's fair, I suppose." He sat back down at the table, running his hands through his dark hair. "My ex-wife, Linda. We were married for 5 years, ran this ranch together. Or at least, I thought we did." Emma waited, sensing there was more to the story. "Turns out, She'd been systematically emptying our accounts for the better part of 2 years, planning to divorce me and take half of everything that was left. Had an affair with our lawyer, convinced him to help her hide assets. Jake's voice was flat, matter of fact, but Emma could hear the pain underneath. Lost almost everything. The only reason I still have the ranch is because it's been in my family for 4 generations, and she couldn't touch the land itself. That's horrible, Emma said softly. The kicker? She tried to have me declared mentally incompetent, claimed I was unfit to run the ranch, said I was dangerous, unstable, had our lawyer file papers claiming I'd threatened her. Jake's hands clenched around his coffee cup. Nearly worked, too. Would have if Peterson hadn't testified on my behalf. Emma was beginning to understand the connection between Jake and the old veterinarian who'd sent her here. He saved your ranch. He saved my life, Jake corrected. When everyone else was ready to believe Linda's lies, Peterson stood up and told the truth about who I really was. Judge threw out her petition, and the divorce was finalized with her getting exactly what she was entitled to and not a penny more. But she's still bothering you. Jake's expression darkened. She remarried last year. Some city lawyer with more money than sense. But apparently, ranch life still has its appeal, and she's decided she wants to buy the Copper Creek. Been making increasingly aggressive offers, trying to pressure me into selling. And that was her just now? Her latest strategy is to claim I'm letting the ranch deteriorate, that I'm not capable of maintaining it properly. She's been spreading rumors in town, trying to turn people against me. Jake met Emma's eyes. Which brings us back to you. I haven't been able to keep a veterinarian on staff because somehow, everyone I hire gets a better offer somewhere else within a few weeks of starting. Funny how that works. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. You think she's been sabotaging your hiring? I think Linda's always been good at getting what she wants, and she doesn't much care who gets hurt in the process. Jake's smile was grim, but here's the thing she didn't count on. Sometimes the people who've been burned are the ones most willing to fight fire with fire. Emma studied his face, trying to read the subtext. What are you saying? I'm saying that you need a job and a place to start over. And I need a veterinarian who won't cut and run at the first sign of trouble. Jake leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. I'm offering you a position, Emma Claire. Full veterinary services for the ranch, competitive salary, housing included. In exchange, you help me prove that this operation is running better than it ever has. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. You're serious? Dead serious. But I need to know something first. Jake's expression grew even more focused. Are you done running from your ghosts? Because what I'm offering isn't just a job. It's a chance to stand and fight, to build something worth defending, but only if you're ready to stop looking over your shoulder. Emma looked down at the basket of kittens, these tiny lives that had somehow become her responsibility, then back at Jake's weathered face. She thought about the long months of rejection, of doors slammed in her face, of sleeping in her truck, and wondering if she'd ever find a place where she belonged. I'm tired of running, she said quietly, more tired than I've ever been in my life. That's not what I asked, Jake said gently. I asked if you're done running. Emma straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. Yes, I'm done running from ghosts. Mine and anyone else's. Jake's smile was the first genuine, full smile she'd seen from him, transforming his entire face. Then welcome to Copper Creek Ranch, Dr. Emma Claire. Hope you're ready for the fight of your life. As if in response to his words, one of the kittens let out a particularly loud mew, making them both laugh. Emma looked around the warm kitchen, at the man who'd just offered her more than a job, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Outside, the Arizona sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, cattle moved slowly across the range, and somewhere a coyote called to its pack. It was beautiful and harsh and unforgiving, just like the man who'd decided to trust her. Emma had arrived at Copper Creek Ranch with nothing but a basket of kittens and a wanted poster. She was leaving the kitchen with a chance at redemption, a purpose, and Maybe, just maybe, a future worth fighting for. The war wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But for the first time in 18 months, Emma Claire felt like she might actually have a chance of winning. The next morning arrived with the kind of spectacular sunrise that made Emma understand why people fought so hard to claim pieces of the desert. She stood on the porch of the small cabin Jake had shown her to the night before, cradling a cup of coffee and watching the sky transform from deep purple to brilliant orange. The kittens were safe in a makeshift nursery she'd set up in the cabin's spare room, finally sleeping peacefully after their midnight feeding. The guest cabin sat about a quarter-mile from the main house, connected by a well-worn path that wound between towering saguaro cacti and desert willows. It was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, hardwood floors, and windows that faced east toward the morning sun. Jake had apologized for its modest accommodations, but to Emma, who'd been sleeping in her truck for the better part of a week, it felt like a palace. She was still marveling at the view when she heard the rumble of an engine approaching. A dusty pickup truck pulled up beside her cabin, and Emma watched as Jake climbed out, looking like he'd already been working for hours despite the early hour. His dark hair was damp with sweat, and his shirt clung to his broad shoulders in a way that made Emma's pulse quicken unexpectedly. "Morning," he called, tipping his hat in her direction. "How'd the babies sleep?" "Better than they have in days," Emma replied, walking down to meet him. "That warm room made all the difference. Thank you again for letting me set up the nursery." Jake's smile was easier this morning, less guarded than it had been the day before. "Least I could do. Besides, this place has been too quiet for too long. Little bit of life never hurt anyone." Emma found herself studying his face in the morning light, noticing details she'd missed in the stress of their first meeting. The lines around his eyes spoke of long days in the sun, but also of laughter, though she suspected there hadn't been much of that lately. His hands, when he gestured, were scarred and calloused but gentle, the hands of someone who'd spent his life caring for living things. "Ready for the grand tour?" Jake asked. "Figured I'd show you around the operation, let you see what you're getting yourself into." Emma nodded, eager to understand the scope of her new responsibilities. They climbed into Jake's truck, and as they drove across the ranch, he pointed out various features of the land. The Copper Creek Ranch covered nearly 15,000 acres of high desert, home to over 2,000 head of cattle, and a small but growing horse breeding program. "My great-grandfather started with 500 acres and 50 head of cattle," Jake explained as they bumped along a dirt road that seemed to stretch toward infinity. "Each generation added to it, built it up. My father was the one who really expanded the operation, brought in better breeding stock, modernized the facilities." "What happened to your parents?" Emma asked gently. Jake's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Car accident when I was 25. Dad was driving back from a cattle auction in Phoenix, hit a drunk driver head-on. Mom died in the hospital 3 days later." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Emma could hear the old pain underneath. "Left me with a ranch to run and no idea how to do it properly. But you figured it out." "Had to. Either that, or lose everything my family had built." Jake glanced at her sideways. "That's when I met Linda. She was fresh out of business school, working for the Agricultural Extension Office. Came out to help me set up proper bookkeeping systems, stayed to help me modernize the whole operation." Emma heard the bitterness creep into his voice and decided not to push. They were approaching a cluster of buildings that looked like the working heart of the ranch. Barns, corrals, equipment sheds, and what appeared to be a modern veterinary facility. "This is impressive," Emma said as Jake parked near the largest barn. "Most ranches I've seen make do with basic first aid setups." That was Linda's idea, actually. One of the few good ones she had. Jake's expression was neutral, but Emma sensed the complexity of emotions behind his words. "She convinced me that having proper veterinary facilities would save money in the long run, let us handle more issues in-house instead of waiting for traveling vets." They climbed out of the truck, and Jake led her toward the veterinary building. It was larger than Emma had expected, with examination rooms, a small surgical suite, and a pharmacy stocked with everything needed for large animal care. The equipment was top-notch, better than what she'd had access to at the clinic in Colorado. "Jake, this is incredible," Emma breathed, running her hands over a state-of-the-art ultrasound machine. "You could run a full veterinary practice out of here." That was the plan, eventually. Set up a clinic that could serve some of the smaller ranches in the area, bring in additional revenue. Jake leaned against the doorframe, watching her explore. Never quite got there, though. Hard to build a client base when you can't keep a veterinarian on staff. Emma turned to face him. About that. Yesterday you mentioned that your previous vets kept getting better offers elsewhere. Do you really think your ex-wife was behind that? Jake's expression darkened. I know she was. Found out about it by accident 6 months ago. One of the vets Linda supposedly poached called me to apologize. Turns out she'd offered him a position at a clinic she was backing financially, told him I was planning to close down the veterinary program anyway. She's been actively sabotaging you. For 3 years now. At first I thought it was just bad luck. Vets are in high demand, especially good ones. But the pattern became too obvious to ignore. Jake walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. I started keeping records. Every veterinarian I've hired. What they told me when they left, when they started their new positions. Emma accepted the folder and flipped through it. The documentation was meticulous, showing a clear pattern of veterinarians leaving for positions that were mysteriously well-funded and specifically tailored to their interests. This is industrial sabotage, Jake. You could take legal action. With what proof? Linda's too smart to leave a paper trail. Everything goes through intermediaries, shell companies, lawyers who specialize in making things disappear. Jake's voice was frustrated. Besides, I've been down that road before. The legal system favors people with money and connections, and Linda has both. Emma closed the folder and looked around the pristine facility again. So what's different about me? Why do you think I'll stay when the others didn't? Jake was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Because you've got something the others didn't. You've got skin in the game. You're not just looking for a job, you're looking for a chance to prove yourself. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because I think you understand what it feels like to have someone try to destroy everything you've worked for. Emma felt a flutter of something warm in her chest at his words. You're betting a lot on that understanding. Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of letting Linda win. Jake's gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Either way, I'm willing to take the risk if you are. Before Emma could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles interrupted them. Through the window, she could see a convoy of trucks pulling into the ranch yard, kicking up clouds of dust in their wake. Expecting company? Emma asked. Jake's expression shifted to one of surprise and concern. That's Tom Bradley's outfit. He runs cattle on the neighboring spread. He was already moving toward the door. Something must be wrong. Tom doesn't make social calls. They walked quickly toward the arriving vehicles, where Emma could see several men climbing out of trucks loaded with cattle. At the head of the group was a weathered man in his 60s, his face grim with worry. Tom, Jake called out as they approached. What's going on? Tom Bradley looked up, relief flooding his features when he saw Jake. Thank God you're here. We've got a situation, Jake. Bad one. What kind of situation? Disease outbreak. Lost 12 heads since yesterday morning, and we've got maybe 24 more showing symptoms. Tom's voice was tight with controlled panic. My regular vet's out of state at a conference, and the emergency services backed up for days. I was hoping. His eyes shifted to Emma, taking in her presence. Jake stepped forward. Tom Bradley, meet Dr. Emma Clare. She just joined our operation as head veterinarian. Emma felt the weight of both men's gazes on her, Tom's hopeful and Jake's quietly supportive. This was her first test, she realized, her chance to prove that Jake's faith in her wasn't misplaced. What are the symptoms, she asked, shifting into professional mode. Tom's relief was palpable. Started with loss of appetite, then high fever, difficulty breathing. Some of them are showing neurological signs, stumbling, disorientation. I've got the affected animals isolated, but I'm scared it's going to spread to the rest of the herd. Emma's mind raced through the possibilities. The symptom combination was concerning, potentially pointing to several serious diseases. How many total head in your herd, Mr. Bradley? Call me Tom. About 800 head, mostly Angus crosses. Any new animals introduced recently? Changes in feed? Grazing areas? Nothing recent. We brought in some new bulls about 6 months ago, but they've been quarantined and tested clean. Tom's weathered face was creased with worry. Doc, I've been ranching for 40 years, and I've never seen anything move this fast. Emma looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. We need to get out there and examine the affected animals, she said decisively. Jake, can you help me load the mobile unit? Already on it, Jake replied, heading toward a well-equipped trailer that Emma hadn't noticed before. As they prepared to leave, Tom walked beside Emma, his voice low. I appreciate this, Doc. More than you know. If this thing spreads, it could wipe out everything I've built. Emma heard the echo of her own desperation in his words, the fear of losing everything that mattered. We'll figure it out, Tom. That's what we're here for. The drive to the Bradley Ranch took 20 minutes across rough terrain that tested the limits of Jake's truck and the veterinary trailer they were pulling. Emma used the time to review her mental catalog of bovine diseases, trying to narrow down the possibilities based on Tom's description. The Bradley Ranch was smaller than Copper Creek but well-maintained, with sturdy fences and clean facilities. Tom led them to a series of isolation pens, where the affected cattle were being kept separate from the main herd. Emma's heart sank when she saw the animals. Several were lying down, breathing heavily, while others stood with their heads hanging low, clearly in distress. Let's start with the worst cases, Emma said, pulling on latex gloves and grabbing her stethoscope. Jake, can you help me get this one into the chute? Working together, they managed to get one of the sicker animals secured for examination. Emma's hands moved efficiently, checking vital signs, examining eyes and mouth, palpating for enlarged lymph nodes. The cow's temperature was dangerously high, and her breathing was labored and shallow. Neurological signs? Emma asked Tom as she completed her external examination. 3 of them had been stumbling, acting confused. One went down this morning and hasn't gotten back up. Emma frowned, pieces of a diagnostic puzzle starting to come together in her mind. I need to take some samples, blood work, nasal swabs, possibly some tissue biopsies if we can manage it safely. For the next 2 hours, Emma worked with focused intensity, examining animal after animal, taking samples, making notes. Jake assisted without being asked, anticipating her needs and handling the cattle with a calm competence that impressed her. Tom hovered nearby, his anxiety palpable but controlled. Finally, Emma stepped back from the last animal, stripping off her gloves and wiping sweat from her forehead. I have a preliminary diagnosis, but I want to run some quick tests to confirm before we start treatment. What are you thinking? Jake asked quietly. Based on the symptom progression and the speed of onset, I'm looking at either bovine respiratory syncytial virus or possibly infectious bovine rhinotracheitis. Both are highly contagious. Both can cause the neurological symptoms we're seeing in advanced cases. Tom's face went pale. How bad is it, Doc? Emma chose her words carefully. It's serious, but it's treatable if we act quickly. The key is aggressive supportive care and getting the right medications started immediately. She looked between the 2 men. The good news is that with proper treatment, mortality rates are relatively low. The bad news is that it's going to require round-the-clock care for the next few days. Whatever it takes, Tom said immediately. Just tell me what you need. Emma pulled out her phone to check the time, calculating dosages and treatment schedules in her head. I need to get back to Copper Creek to run these samples and prepare medications. Jake, is your lab setup capable of basic serology and blood chemistry? Everything you need, Jake assured her. What else? We're going to need to set up a treatment protocol for all the affected animals, plus prophylactic care for any that might have been exposed. It's going to mean long days and short nights for the next week at least. Tom stepped forward, his weathered hand extended. Doc, I can't thank you enough. After what happened with my regular vet being unavailable, I was starting to panic. Emma shook his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of decades of hard work. That's what neighbors are for, right? As they loaded up the samples and prepared to head back to Copper Creek, Emma found herself riding on an unexpected high. For the first time in 18 months, she felt like herself again, like the veterinarian she'd trained to be. The familiar rush of diagnostic challenge, the satisfaction of having answers when someone desperately needed them, the simple joy of being useful again. You were impressive back there, Jake said as they drove back across the desert, the setting sun painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Just doing my job." "No," Jake said seriously. "That was more than just doing a job. That was someone who genuinely cares about the animals and the people who depend on them. Tom was ready to lose everything, and you gave him hope." Emma was quiet for a moment, watching the landscape roll by. "It felt good," she admitted. "I'd forgotten what it was like to have someone trust me to solve their problems instead of assuming I was the problem." Jake glanced at her sideways. "Maybe it's time you started trusting yourself again, too." They spent the evening in Jake's laboratory, Emma running tests while Jake prepared medications and treatment schedules. The work was familiar and comforting, the kind of methodical process that had always calmed Emma's racing mind. Jake proved to be an excellent assistant, understanding her needs without detailed explanation and handling the technical aspects with surprising skill. "You've done this before," Emma observed as Jake efficiently prepared syringes with calculated dosages. "Linda insisted I learn. Said it would make the operation more efficient if I could handle basic veterinary procedures myself." Jake's voice was neutral, but Emma caught the slight tightness around his eyes. Turns out she was right, even if her motives weren't entirely pure. Emma looked up from the microscope where she'd been examining blood samples. It must be strange, having so many reminders of her around. Jake was quiet for a moment, his hands still working steadily. "For a long time, I thought about getting rid of everything she'd influenced, starting completely over. But then I realized that would mean destroying a lot of good things along with the bad. This lab, the veterinary facilities, even some of the business practices she implemented, they're all solid improvements, regardless of who suggested them." "That's very mature of you." "Or very stubborn, hard to tell sometimes." Jake's smile was wry. "I decided I wasn't going to let her take away the good parts of what we built together, even if the marriage itself was a lie." Emma felt a pang of sympathy for the complexity of his situation. Her own betrayal had been cleaner in some ways, easier to walk away from. Jake was living every day surrounded by reminders of what he'd lost, trying to separate the value from the pain. "Test results are in," she said, refocusing on the samples. "Definitely bovine respiratory syncytial virus, but we caught it early. With aggressive treatment, Tom should see improvement within 48 hours. Jake looked genuinely relieved. "That's great news. Tom's a good man. Been struggling since his wife died last year. Losing his herd would have finished him." Emma made notes on treatment protocols, her mind already working through the logistics of the next few days. "We'll need to check on the animals twice daily, adjust medications based on response, monitor for secondary infections. It's going to be intensive." "I'll clear my schedule," Jake said immediately. "Whatever you need." Emma looked at him in surprise. "You don't have to do that. I can handle the medical care." "This is my community too, Emma, and besides," Jake's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, "I want to see you work. Yesterday you showed me your wanted poster and your failures. Today I want to watch you succeed." The next morning brought both challenge and vindication. Emma and Jake arrived at the Bradley Ranch before dawn to find several of the treated animals already showing signs of improvement. Tom met them at the isolation pens, his relief evident in every line of his body. 3 of them were on their feet and eating when I checked at 5 this morning, he reported. "Haven't seen that in days." Emma moved from animal to animal, checking temperatures, listening to lung sounds, adjusting medications based on each individual's response. The improvement was dramatic and consistent, exactly what she'd hoped to see. "Keep them isolated for another 72 hours, she instructed Tom as they finished the morning treatment round. "Continue the antibiotics for the full course even if they seem completely recovered. We don't want any relapses." "Yes, ma'am. Doc, I can't tell you how grateful I am. When I saw those first animals go down, I thought I was looking at the end of everything." Emma felt the familiar warmth of professional satisfaction, the knowledge that her skills had made a real difference in someone's life. "That's what we're here for, Tom." As they loaded up to return to Copper Creek, Emma found herself humming softly, something she hadn't done in months. Jake noticed, his smile knowing. "Feeling good?" he asked. "Feeling useful," Emma corrected. "It's been a while." They were halfway back to Copper Creek. when Jake's phone rang through the truck's Bluetooth system. The name that appeared on the dashboard display made Jake's expression immediately harden. Linda Morrison. "Don't answer it," Emma said quickly. "I have to. She'll just keep calling, and it's usually better to deal with her directly than let her build up steam." Jake pressed the accept button. "What do you want, Linda?" Linda's voice filled the truck cabin, honey-sweet with an undercurrent of steel. "Hello, Jake. I heard through the grapevine that you found yourself another veterinarian. Congratulations." Emma felt ice form in her stomach. The speed of Linda's information network was alarming. "News travels fast in a small community," Jake replied carefully. "It does indeed, especially when that news involves someone with such an interesting background." Linda's pause was deliberate, loaded with implication. "Dr. Emma Clare, isn't it? Formerly of Colorado. Currently suspended from practice due to some unfortunate professional difficulties?" Emma's hands clenched in her lap. Jake glanced at her, his expression supportive but concerned. "Emma's credentials are perfectly adequate for ranch work," Jake said evenly. Linda's laugh was musical and completely without warmth. "Oh, I'm sure they are. Though I do wonder what Tom Bradley would think if he knew the person treating his prize cattle was facing charges of falsifying medical records and endangering animal welfare." Emma felt the familiar wave of shame and anger that accompanied any mention of the Colorado situation. Beside her, Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Is there a point to this call, Linda?" "Just looking out for the community, darling. You know how I feel about the reputation of our local ranching industry." Another pause. "Though I suppose everyone deserves a second chance. Or is this Dr. Clare's third chance? Fourth? I lose track of these things." Emma couldn't stand it anymore. "This is Emma Clare," she said, leaning toward the phone. "If you have something to say to me, say it directly." Silence stretched for a moment. Then Linda's voice returned, sharper now. "Dr. Clare, how refreshing to hear from you directly. I was just telling Jake how much I admire people who land on their feet after professional setbacks. It takes a special kind of resilience." "Some setbacks are temporary," Emma replied evenly. "Others are permanent. I guess we'll see which kind mine turns out to be." "Indeed we will." Linda's tone had shifted to something more calculating. "Well, I should let you both get back to your work. Though, Jake, darling, we really should sit down and discuss that offer I mentioned. The one that would let you start fresh somewhere new, without all the baggage of trying to rebuild something that's already failed." The line went dead, leaving Emma and Jake sitting in tense silence as the truck continued across the desert landscape. "I'm sorry," Emma said finally. "I shouldn't have engaged with her. I just couldn't stand listening to her talk about me like I wasn't there." Jake pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to face her. "Don't apologize." That was exactly the right response. Linda's used to people being intimidated by her, backing down when she starts making threats. You stood up to her. But now she knows I'm here, knows about my background. She's going to use it against both of us. Jake's smile was grim but determined. Let her try. "Emma, what you did for Tom Bradley yesterday and today, that's real. That's something she can't take away or discredit. Word's going to spread about how you saved his herd, and people in this community value actions over gossip." Emma wanted to believe him, but 18 months of rejection had taught her how quickly reputation could override competence. What if she's right, though? What if my being here damages your standing in the community? Jake reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and steady. "Then we'll deal with it together." "Emma, I told you yesterday that I was tired of letting Linda win. I meant it. If she wants a fight, she'll get one. But this time she's not facing someone who's going to roll over and give up." Emma looked into his gray eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Absolute certainty. Not just in his own abilities, but in hers. It was a gift she hadn't received from anyone in longer than she could remember. "What do you think she meant about that offer?" Emma asked. Jake's expression darkened. She's been trying to buy the ranch for 2 years now, ever since she remarried. Her new husband's some hotshot lawyer from Phoenix, with more money than he knows what to do with. They want to turn Copper Creek into some kind of luxury development, guest ranch for wealthy tourists. Over your dead body, I'm guessing. Something like that. This land has been in my family for 4 generations. I'm not selling it to be turned into a playground for rich people who think ranching is romantic. Jake's voice carried the steel of absolute conviction. But Linda's patient, and she's smart. She's been systematically undermining my operation, making it harder for me to maintain profitability, hoping I'll eventually get desperate enough to sell. Emma thought about the pattern of veterinarians leaving, the careful sabotage Linda had orchestrated. She's been playing a long game, very long. But here's what she didn't count on. Jake squeezed Emma's hand gently. She didn't count on me finding someone who's been through their own version of hell and come out fighting. Someone who understands what it means to have everything stripped away and still keep going. Emma felt something shift inside her, a hardening of resolve that reminded her of who she'd been before Colorado, before Marcus Webb had stolen her confidence along with her reputation. So what do? Jake's smile was fierce and full of promise. We prove that Copper Creek Ranch is thriving. We build up the veterinary program, expand our client base, show the whole community that this operation is stronger than it's ever been. He paused, his eyes holding hers. And we do it together. As they resumed driving toward the ranch, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Anticipation for the future instead of dread. Linda Morrison might have money and connections, but she was about to discover what Emma had learned the hard way. Sometimes the people who've been knocked down the hardest are the ones who fight back the fiercest. The war for Copper Creek Ranch had begun, and Emma Claire was no longer running from the fight. 3 weeks later, Emma stood in the veterinary clinic watching the morning sun filter through the windows, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before her world collapsed in Colorado. The Bradley cattle had made a full recovery, and word of her success had spread throughout the ranching community faster than wildfire. Her appointment book was fuller than it had been in years, with requests for services coming from ranches as far as 50 miles away. He's sleeping, she said, but David was already shaking his head. No, Emma, he's not. Emma felt the world start to spin as David pointed toward the main barn, where a small figure had just emerged from the shadows. Mason, dressed in miniature work clothes that someone had obviously provided for him, was carefully carrying a bucket that was far too large for his small frame, his face serious with concentration as he followed Carlos toward the cattle pens. There's our son, David said with satisfaction, working like a common ranch hand instead of playing with toys or learning his letters like other children his age. Emma watched Mason struggle with the bucket, saw the way Carlos stayed close to help without making the boy feel incompetent, witnessed the pride on her son's face as he successfully completed his small task. To her, it was beautiful, a child learning responsibility and finding his place in a community that valued his contributions. But she could see how it would look to an outside observer, to a judge who didn't understand ranch life. A toddler doing manual labor, unsupervised and potentially in danger, while his mother prioritized livestock over childcare. Mason loves what he's learning here, Emma said desperately. He's happy, David. Happier than he ever was in Colorado. Happiness isn't the legal standard for custody decisions, David replied coldly. Safety is, stability is, and from what I can see, you're providing neither. Jake had been silent throughout this exchange, but now he stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of controlled anger. Mr. Chen, I think you've said enough. Emma is an exemplary employee and mother. Mason is safe, supervised, and learning valuable life skills. If you have legal business to conduct, you can do it through proper channels with appropriate representation. David's attention shifted to Jake with the focus of a predator identifying a threat. And what's your stake in this, Morrison? Besides the obvious benefits of having a woman desperate enough to work for probably half what you'd pay a man. Emma saw Jake's hands clench into fists and step between the two men before the situation could escalate further. Stop it, both of you. David, you've delivered your message. Now leave. Oh, I'm not going anywhere just yet, David said with false pleasantness. I think I'll stay in town for a few days. Maybe observe Mason's living conditions more closely. Small-town ranch work was never going to be enough for someone with your abilities. Emma set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, studying Jake's carefully neutral expression. Is that what you think? That I'm just marking time here until something better comes along? Aren't you? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither seemed ready to address directly. Emma felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized they were dancing around something that had been building between them for weeks. What if I said no? She asked quietly. What if I said this is exactly where I want to be? Jake's carefully maintained composure cracked just slightly. I'd say you're not thinking clearly. Emma, what we've built here, it's good. But it's not going to get your license reinstated. It's not going to clear your name or give you back everything you lost. Maybe I don't want those things back. Maybe I've found something better. Jake stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the ranch yard. Don't do that. Don't make this decision based on whatever you think is happening between us. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. What exactly do you think is happening between us? Jake turned to face her, his expression raw with an honesty that took her breath away. I think we're two people who've been hurt badly, finding comfort in each other's company. I think we're grateful for the understanding we've found, and maybe we're confusing that gratitude with something else. His words hit Emma like a physical blow. Is that really what you think? I think you deserve better than settling for a man who comes with more baggage than a cargo plane and a life that will keep you looking over your shoulder for ex-wives and their schemes. Jake's voice grew rougher. I think you should take Peterson's offer and build the life you actually want, not the one you're willing to accept because you're tired of running. Emma stood, anger flaring hot in her chest. Don't you dare tell me what I want, Jake Morrison. And don't you dare make decisions for me based on what you think I deserve. Then tell me I'm wrong, Jake challenged, stepping closer. Tell me you're not here because you had nowhere else to go. Tell me you chose Copper Creek Ranch because it's where you want to build your future, not because it's where you ended up when you ran out of options. Emma opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, Jake's words hitting uncomfortably close to home. Had she chosen this place, or had circumstances simply deposited her here? The distinction felt crucial, but in the heat of the moment, she couldn't untangle her motivations clearly enough to argue. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken tensions and half-acknowledged feelings. Finally, Jake stepped back, his expression closing off. That's what I thought, he said quietly. Emma, take the job in Texas. Build the life you actually want. Don't settle for this one because you're grateful or comfortable or afraid to start over again. Before Emma could respond, Jake was gone, leaving her standing alone in the clinic with her heart racing and her thoughts in chaos. Through the window, she watched his truck disappear down the road, kicking up dust that hung in the still morning air like a physical manifestation of everything unsaid between them. Emma sank back into her chair, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to process what had just happened. Jake was right about one thing. She had ended up at Copper Creek Ranch because she'd run out of other options. But somewhere in the past few weeks, her feelings about being here had evolved from desperate gratitude to something much more complex. She thought about her morning routine, the satisfaction of walking into the clinic knowing exactly what her day would hold. She thought about the way Jake's face lit up when she succeeded with a difficult case, the quiet conversations they'd shared over dinner, the easy partnership they'd developed both professionally and personally. She thought about the kittens who had claimed not just her cabin but her heart, and about the way the desert sunrise could steal her breath with its beauty. Was that settling, or was that finding home? Before she could untangle her emotions further, the sound of approaching vehicles interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she could see a convoy of expensive SUVs pulling into the ranch yard, their black paint gleaming in the morning sun. Emma's stomach dropped as she recognized the lead vehicle, Linda Morrison's Mercedes, flanked by what appeared to be a small army of professionally dressed individuals. Emma grabbed her phone and called Jake, but it went straight to voicemail. She left a quick message, then locked up the clinic and headed toward the main house, where Linda and her entourage were already disembarking. Linda looked every inch the successful businesswoman in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Emma made in a month. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the desert heat, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. The people with her looked like lawyers and accountants, The kind of professionals who specialized in making problems disappear for people with enough money. "Dr. Clare," Linda called out as Emma approached. "How lovely to see you again. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but we have some business to discuss with Jake." "He's not here at the moment," Emma replied carefully. "Can I help you with something?" Linda's smile widened. "Actually, you might be exactly the person we need to speak with. My associates here have been doing some research into the recent activities at Copper Creek Ranch, particularly the expansion of veterinary services." One of the suited men stepped forward, extending a business card. "Dr. Clare, I'm David Hartwell from the Arizona State Veterinary Board. We've received some concerning reports about unlicensed veterinary practice occurring at this facility." Emma felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "I'm sorry, what reports?" "Reports that you've been providing veterinary services throughout this county despite your suspended license status," Hartwell continued, his voice professionally neutral but carrying an unmistakable threat. "Treating animals, prescribing medications, performing procedures that require an active license." Emma's mind raced. "My license suspension is specific to Colorado. I'm not prohibited from practicing in Arizona, and I applied for temporary licensing through the state board 6 weeks ago." Hartwell consulted a tablet, his expression skeptical. "We have no record of any such application, Dr. Clare. And according to our information, your Colorado suspension carries reciprocity agreements that would prevent you from obtaining licensing in Arizona until the original charges are resolved." Emma felt the familiar sick sensation of walls closing in around her. "That's not possible. I submitted all the required paperwork, paid the fees. I have copies of everything in my cabin." "I'm sure you do," Linda said smoothly. "Though paperwork can be so easily misplaced, can't it? Government agencies are notoriously inefficient." The implication was clear, and Emma felt anger burn through her panic. "You've been interfering with my license application." "That's a serious accusation, Dr. Clare," Hartwell said. "One that would require substantial proof. In the meantime, I'm afraid I have to inform you that continuing to practice veterinary medicine without proper licensing is a felony offense in the state of Arizona." Emma looked around at the faces surrounding her, all professionally blank except for Linda's, which radiated satisfied malice. "What do you want?" "What we want," said another of Linda's associates, a sharp-faced woman with calculating eyes, "is to prevent any further violations of state veterinary practice laws. We're prepared to file formal charges against both you and Mr. Morrison for operating an unlicensed veterinary facility." "Jake has nothing to do with this," Emma said quickly. "If there are licensing issues, they're my responsibility." Linda stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow made her words more threatening. "Oh, but he has everything to do with it, dear. As the ranch owner, he's legally responsible for any illegal activities conducted on his property. The penalties for facilitating unlicensed medical practice are quite severe." Emma's heart sank as she realized the trap Linda had constructed. By allowing Emma to practice without verifying her licensing status, Jake could face criminal charges that would destroy not just his reputation but his ability to maintain the ranch. "However," Linda continued, "we're reasonable people. We understand that sometimes these situations arise from simple misunderstandings rather than criminal intent." "What kind of misunderstandings?" Emma asked, though she already suspected where this was heading. The sharp-faced woman opened a briefcase and removed a stack of legal documents. "We're prepared to overlook this unfortunate situation entirely, provided certain conditions are met. First, Dr. Clare ceases all veterinary activities immediately and leaves the state within 72 hours. Second, Mr. Morrison accepts a generous offer for the sale of Copper Creek Ranch, allowing him to relocate and start fresh without the burden of potential criminal charges." Emma stared at the documents, recognizing the elegant trap Linda had constructed. By targeting Emma's licensing status, she'd found a way to force both of them off the ranch, while appearing to be acting in the public interest. "And if we refuse?" Emma asked. Hartwell stepped forward again. "Then I'll be filing formal charges with the state attorney's office this afternoon. Dr. Clare will face up to 5 years in prison and substantial fines. Mr. Morrison will face charges as an accessory, plus the loss of his ranch when the state seizes it as part of the criminal proceedings. Emma felt the desert heat pressing down on her like a weight, making it hard to breathe. Everything she'd built over the past few weeks, the fragile sense of belonging she'd found, the growing feelings she'd been afraid to acknowledge, all of it was crumbling around her just like before. "I need time to think," she said finally. Linda checked her expensive watch. "Of course, you have until 5 o'clock this afternoon to make your decision. After that, Mr. Hartwell will proceed with filing charges." She smiled, the expression holding no warmth whatsoever. "I do hope you'll make the sensible choice, Dr. Clare. It would be such a shame to see more lives destroyed by stubborn pride." As the convoy of SUVs disappeared down the ranch road, Emma stood alone in the yard, feeling smaller and more powerless than she had since the darkest days in Colorado. Linda had found her weakness and exploited it perfectly, using Emma's desire to protect Jake against both of them. She was still standing there, paralyzed by the magnitude of the disaster, when Jake's truck roared into the yard, kicking up a cloud of dust as he braked hard beside her. "Emma, what the hell happened?" Jake demanded as he climbed out. "I got your message and 3 calls from Tom Bradley, saying there were state officials here." Emma turned to face him, seeing her own devastation reflected in his gray eyes. "Linda happened. Jake, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "What's your fault?" "Emma, talk to me." Emma explained Linda's trap, watching Jake's expression grow darker with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "So she's using your licensing status to force us both off the ranch," he said finally. "It's worse than that. If I don't leave by tomorrow evening, you'll face criminal charges as an accessory. Jake, you could lose everything because of me." Jake's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Lose everything? Emma, without you here, I've already lost everything that matters." Emma stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What does that mean?" Jake stepped closer, his gray eyes intense, with emotion he was no longer trying to hide. "It means I was an idiot this morning. It means I was so scared of you leaving that I tried to push you away first, convince myself that what we have isn't real." "Jake." "Let me finish," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "I told you this morning that you deserved better than a man with baggage and a complicated life. But the truth is, I'm the one who doesn't deserve better. I don't deserve someone who looks at my broken-down operation and sees potential. I don't deserve someone who fights for Tom Bradley's cattle like they were her own. I don't deserve someone who makes me remember what it feels like to hope for the future instead of just surviving it." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. "You deserve all of that and more. Then why are you planning to leave?" "Because staying will destroy you." Emma's voice cracked with desperation. "Jake, if I don't go, Linda will make sure you lose the ranch, your reputation, everything your family built. I won't be responsible for that." Jake reached out and took her hands, his calloused fingers warm and steady. "What if I told you I'd rather lose the ranch than lose you? Then I'd say Linda has already won, because she's made you choose between 2 things you love." Jake was quiet for a moment, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "Maybe she has. Or maybe she's given us the chance to prove something to ourselves." "What do you mean?" Jake's smile was fierce and full of determination. "I mean, maybe it's time to stop playing defense and start fighting back. Emma, Linda's been counting on us being isolated, being too scared to stand up to her pressure. But what if we're not alone? What if this community she's so worried about protecting actually supports us?" Emma felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by harsh reality. "Jake, she has state officials, lawyers, documented evidence of licensing violations. What do we have? We have Tom Bradley's cattle, healthy and alive because of your skill. We have a dozen other ranchers who've seen what you can do. We have Peterson's reputation backing us, and we have the truth." Jake's grip on her hands tightened. "And we have each other, if you're willing to fight instead of run." Emma looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. Absolute faith, not just in their cause, but in her. In them. It was a gift she'd stopped believing she deserved. "What did you have in mind?" she asked quietly. Jake's smile was answer enough. 2 hours later, Emma stood in the community center in town, watching as ranchers, veterinarians, and local business owners filed into the room. Jake had spent the morning making calls, and the response had been overwhelming. Word of Linda's ultimatum had spread through the close-knit ranching community like wildfire, and the reaction had been swift and decisive. Tom Bradley was the first to speak, his weathered face serious as he addressed the crowd. "Most of you know what Dr. Claire did for my herd 3 weeks ago. Without her, I'd have lost everything. Now Linda Morrison wants to run her out of town because of some licensing technicality that smells like a setup to me." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Emma felt Jake's presence beside her, steady and reassuring as more voices joined the conversation. "This isn't about veterinary licensing," called out Maria Santos, who ran the largest horse breeding operation in the county. "This is about Linda Morrison trying to force Jake off his land so she can turn Copper Creek into some tourist playground. We all know it." Dr. Peterson, who had driven over from New Mexico when Jake called him, stood up slowly. "I've known Emma Claire for 5 years. Worked with her on multiple cases. The charges against her in Colorado are fabricated, designed to destroy the career of a veterinarian who refused to participate in illegal breeding operations." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes as Peterson continued. "I've also reviewed her Arizona licensing application. It was properly submitted and should have been approved weeks ago. The fact that it's mysteriously disappeared from the state board's records suggests interference at the highest levels." Hartwell, who had remained in town to oversee the ultimatum, stood up from where he'd been sitting in the back of the room. "Dr. Peterson, while I respect your opinion, the fact remains that Dr. Claire has been practicing without proper licensing. Under emergency provisions that allow unlicensed practice under the supervision of a licensed veterinarian," Peterson replied smoothly. "I've been providing that supervision remotely, and I'm prepared to testify to that effect in any legal proceeding." Emma stared at Peterson in shock. He'd never mentioned remote supervision, but she realized he was creating a legal framework that could protect both her and Jake from Linda's charges. The sharp-faced woman who'd accompanied Linda earlier stood up, her expression coldly professional. "Even if that supervision existed, which we dispute, it doesn't address the larger issue of unlicensed facility operation." "Actually, it does," said a new voice from the doorway. Emma turned to see a woman in her 50s entering the room, carrying a briefcase and wearing the confident expression of someone used to winning legal battles. Jake leaned over to whisper in Emma's ear. "Sarah Chen, best lawyer in 3 counties. I called her this morning." Sarah Chen walked to the front of the room, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've spent the morning reviewing the legal framework surrounding this situation, and I have some interesting findings to share." She opened her briefcase and removed a stack of documents. First, Dr. Claire's licensing application was indeed properly submitted and should have been approved. The fact that it's missing from state records constitutes administrative malpractice, for which the state board can be held liable. Hartwell's expression shifted from confident to concerned. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious situation," Chen replied. Second, the reciprocity agreements cited as preventing Dr. Claire from obtaining Arizona licensing don't actually exist in the form claimed. Colorado suspension applies only to Colorado practice, not to licensing in other states. Emma felt her heart hammering as Chen continued. Third, and most importantly, the entities making these licensing complaints have failed to disclose their financial interest in the outcome. Mrs. Morrison's development company stands to gain millions of dollars if Copper Creek Ranch is forced into sale. Linda, who had been sitting quietly in the front row, stood up abruptly. "That's completely irrelevant to the licensing issues." "On the contrary," Chen replied, "it goes directly to the credibility and motivation of the complainants. When we add in the pattern of veterinary sabotage Mr. Morrison has documented over the past 3 years, we have a clear case of malicious interference with business operations." The room erupted in conversations as the implications of Chen's words sank in. Emma looked at Jake, seeing her own amazement reflected in his expression. "There's one more thing," Chen continued, raising her voice over the crowd. "This afternoon, I filed emergency motions with both the State Veterinary Board and the county court system. Dr. Claire's licensing application has been expedited for immediate review, and injunctive relief has been sought against any attempts to interfere with Copper Creek Ranch's operations pending resolution of these issues. Linda's composed facade finally cracked. This is ridiculous. You can't just ignore state licensing requirements because they're inconvenient. You're absolutely right, Chen agreed. Which is why Dr. Claire will be fully licensed within 48 hours, assuming the state board processes her application with the same efficiency they showed in making it disappear. Emma felt Jake's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. Around them, the room was buzzing with conversation and barely restrained celebration. Tom Bradley was grinning like he'd won the lottery, and Peterson was nodding with satisfaction. "This isn't over," Linda said, her voice tight with fury. "There are other avenues, other approaches." "Yes, there are," Chen replied calmly. "But they all lead through me now, and I have a very different approach to legal warfare than your previous opponents." As Linda and her associates filed out of the community center, their earlier confidence replaced by grim determination, Emma found herself surrounded by ranchers and neighbors, offering congratulations and support. The warmth of their acceptance, the genuine pleasure they took in her victory, was overwhelming after so many months of rejection and suspicion. "I can't believe this is happening," Emma whispered to Jake as the crowd began to thin out. "Believe it," Jake replied, his arms sliding around her waist. "This community chose us, Emma. They chose to fight for what we've built here." Emma leaned into his warmth, feeling something settle in her chest that she recognized as peace. "So what happens now?" Jake's smile was soft and full of promise. "Now we go home. We build the life we want, together. We prove that sometimes the people who've been knocked down the hardest are the ones who build the strongest foundations." Later that evening, as the sun set over Copper Creek Ranch, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Emma and Jake sat on the porch of the main house with 5 rapidly growing kittens climbing over their laps. The veterinary clinic was locked up for the night, but Emma's appointment book was already full for the next 3 weeks. "Dr. Peterson called while you were feeding the babies," Jake said, stroking the orange tom that had claimed his shoulder as a perch. "Your Arizona license came through. Official and everything." Emma smiled, scratching behind the ears of the gray tabby that had been the smallest of the litter. "It feels surreal. This morning I thought I was going to lose everything again. And instead..." Emma looked around at the ranch that had become home, at the man who'd taught her that trust could be rebuilt stronger than before, at the small creatures that had somehow led her to exactly where she needed to be. "Instead, I found out what it means to have people willing to fight for you." Jake leaned over and kissed her softly, the gesture full of promise and possibility. "Speaking of fighting for things," he said when they broke apart, "there's something I want to ask you." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried? That depends on how you feel about making this arrangement permanent." Jake's smile was nervous and hopeful and completely irresistible. "Emma Claire, will you stay? Not because you have nowhere else to go. Not because you're grateful or comfortable or afraid to start over. Will you stay? Because this is where you want to build your life." Emma looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw her future reflected there. Challenging, unpredictable, full of the kind of love that was worth fighting for. "Jake Morrison," she said, her voice soft with certainty, "I thought you'd never ask." As the stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, Emma Claire finally understood the difference between settling and choosing. She'd arrived at Copper Creek Ranch running from ghosts, carrying nothing but kittens and a wanted poster. She was staying because she'd found something worth more than vindication or professional redemption. She'd found home. The kittens purred in contentment. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility, and somewhere in the distance, cattle moved peacefully across land that would never be sold to developers. It was exactly the life Emma had stopped believing she deserved, built with a man who taught her that sometimes the best foundations are laid by people who've learned how to rise from ruins. Linda Morrison would undoubtedly find new ways to cause trouble, but Emma was no longer the same woman who'd fled Colorado in defeat. She was done running from ghosts. From now on, she was staying to fight for the future she and Jake would build together, one day at a time, on the ranch that had taught them both how to trust again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.